And I just want to start tonight by giving a huge shout out to the elementary coaches who spent a long and intense day supporting teachers in transitioning from instructional cycle 1 to instructional cycle 2, reflecting on their task, looking at some student work, and really digging in for many hours to designing a new task for instructional cycle 2. So huge kudos to everyone on this call who spent all day working and thinking hard and still showed up to work and think a little bit more tonight. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before the official start time, but I mean, I just really want to give some shout outs. It was so neat to see the work happening today. You know, Teresa, I feel like you had a breakthrough on your task. It's looking so solid. Beth and Jen, you were just getting in there, hopping from table to table, helping people out, sharing the learning that you've had in your own experience and helping them apply that to their own work. And I could tell that they just felt supported and, you know, like they had a resource in all of you. And of course that extends to the district level coaches here as well, who worked very hard to set this up. So it was just a really awesome day. And I know you're tired, so I wanted to give a big shout out to that. So thank you, everybody. And for those of you who will be there on Thursday, you have something to look forward to. I think that is really nice to have time to come together and just do the work in a supported way. You know, we've got our resources, but it's really about getting the work done. So really looking forward to another day together on Thursday and seeing some of you in person again. All right, so tonight is our last 90-minute session to kind of cover some of the content that we missed during the hurricane. And I'm excited about tonight because we're going to continue to wear our two hats of learner and leader and really take some time to dig in explicitly to our own modules. We're going to go into breakout rooms like we did last week and do a little bit of work on our instructional ladders, looking at some mini tasks together, thinking about alignment and the structure of effective mini tasks. And then we're also going to take a look at some of the material in the courses in IC3 and think about how to use those and facilitate those with others. So we're really going to give equal share, I think, tonight to both the learner and the leader hats and hopefully get some good work done together. So I'm going to kick it over to Megan to start us off with our LDC tip for the week before we transition into workshopping.
Great, thank you. Kudos again, just echoing Nicole's kudos. She was just texting me a little bit about your day. And I'm excited to keep hearing more. And it's neat. It sounds like people feel pretty successful in supporting your teachers in your context. And that's the goal. And things start making more sense once you start using them with other humans. So that's always nice. So we're starting off today with this basics, excuse me, I always say that wrong. Basics check. You saw this last week in our skills and instruction workshop protocol. Heather just popped it in the chat for you too. This, I know, amid a sea of good resources, this one really stands out. I can tell you from experience reviewing countless tasks and peer reviewing many, many modules at this point, this is a tried and true resource that I continue to return to, in particular because it gives you those fast actions so that you can check overall alignment in instructional ladders. And misalignment, most misalignment in ladders anyhow, it does begin with one of these fairly observable points that you can really quickly see and provide some feedback on to a teacher. I'll point out the main areas of the basics chart here, and then we'll return to this resource and use it during our workshop session or breakout sessions in a little bit. So first off, if you start, again, as I said, generally when you see misalignment in ladders, you're seeing one of these observable points on the basics chart. You're starting out looking at the skills, and in particular, if the skills are enduring. People define enduring in a number of ways. You've seen that phrase several times in the coursework. Something that has stuck with me comes from a principal, actually Heather's former principal, and he had a quick little device for himself that he would share with his staff. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something kind of, he called it, I think it was the 20-20-20 rule. He might have used 40 at any rate. In my head, I used 20. And I asked myself, is this something students need to know in 20 days, in 20 weeks, in 20 years? And enduring skills are really, those are the skills students are going to be using 20 years from now. Things that they'll use again and again in college and in career beyond that. So you're really looking for those enduring skills when you're just doing that quick check of the teacher's skills ladder. Then when you drill a little deeper into the mini tasks themselves, you're going to be looking at these 4 major parts of the mini tasks as you read about in sessions 5 and 6 of the course this past week. You're looking at products, prompts, scoring guides, and instructional strategies. So in particular, the products are the items that demonstrate that skill for the day. So you're really looking, I can't recommend enough copying and pasting in this world. So I've sometimes copied and pasted language straight from the basic basics chart here, just to give people examples of what types of products can demonstrate the skill that mini task is targeting. So quick writes, notes, organizers, etc. We need to, and sometimes this will give you good guidance to see if you need to do a little bit of probing or deeper thinking with the teacher to understand, hey, does that daily product really help give us evidence that the student has mastered that skill so that we can move them along in your instructional sequencing, get them closer to that final product for your module. You'll likely see a lot of folks need support with the prompts in particular. These prompts are meant to be student facing. That is to say they're talking directly to the students. I've copied this language quite a bit in feedback to teachers. A prompt needs to be written as directions to the kids about developing that day's product or that mini tasks product. And offer them some examples. Take notes, fill in the outline, create a. These are, directives to the kids to get them understanding what their task is for that day so that they can complete the task and turn in or complete that product that demonstrates their mastery of the day's skill. So the scoring guides are super important components that you'll also likely find yourself coaching teachers around. The scoring guides really bring intentionality, I think, to the overall mini task. And these should identify, let me point out the language that I often use. Here's what I'm constantly popping into my feedback for teachers is, does this scoring guide give you evidence that the students are developing the mini tasks targeted skill? So if the skill for the day is annotating for evidence of character reactions to events, your scoring guide is going to want to give you that quick kind of yes or no or quick check mark that the student is showing you, yes, they identified evidence of character reaction in that book. We'll dig a little deeper into this when we look at specific mini tasks as well, because it makes more sense, I think, in context too. But I think you'll find yourself copying and pasting this supportive language for prompts and scoring guides in particular. The instructional strategies also one of the main components of the mini task. These, in a nutshell, ensure that mini task skill is taught. There's explicit instruction to teach the skill rather than simply assign the skill or assign the day's lesson. These are the main components. Again, we'll review this as we move along here, but I completely suggest printing this or bookmarking it for yourself today so we can continue using it and you can use it with your teams moving forward. Heather, Nicole, anything you'd add about your own experiences using the basic basics chart?
I would just echo you, Megan, in that I use it a lot. It's such a
more than I thought I would, to be honest.
It's like a one-hand thing. It's like, these are the elements of mini tasks. Here's what I need to check for to make sure a mini task is structured the way it's supposed to be. It's just super handy.
And you made a really good point too, Megan, about using this as a resource in response to your teachers. Like having the wording already there for you is really helpful because you already know that's going to guide them in the right direction, right? So I agree.
Right.
Well done.
Right. Like we were talking about today with design is true of coaching and feedback sometimes too, right? Our principle is don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. If you've got something where you can just grab that language and know you have the clarity and consistency, that saves you time, it keeps consistency, it's wonderful.
Yeah. All right. So let's press onward. I am going to, Nicole, anything else to add, or can I hop straight into instructional cycle 3, session 7?
Let's move on.
Okay, great. I'll keep this new friend of ours, or old friend for some of us, up for later. But I'm going to head into our design assignments. Let me back out here just to show you the pathway. Although this is our well-worn pathway at this point. So head into design assignments in Core Tools, and we're going to be heading into instructional cycle 3. So for your asynchronous or kind of offline, as it were, work, we'd asked you to review and move through sessions 5 and 6 of instructional cycle 3. Those, as you can see, they focus on analyzing mini tasks themselves. Session 5 also looked a little more closely at the LDC rubric. And then actually getting into selecting those good fit mini tasks and ensuring that, again, product, prompt, scoring guide, and instructional strategies in the mini tasks are a good fit for the skill you know your kids need to develop in order to master the focus standards and get closer to that end product for your module. So we're gonna head into session 7 today, because this is the really, it's kind of the zoom out section again, where you're really meant to, okay, let me zoom out from my skills list and think, is this overall instructional sequence aligned? Does it lead my kids to that purpose, that overall purpose and that end product for the module? So here's what we're gonna do. We are going to take 5 minutes to review session 7 on our own screens. I'd like you can drill into certain sections as you need, and I'll give the full 5 minutes so that you can move through as many of those sections as possible. Quick shout out also to the right-hand bar here. Especially, please take a look at the active facilitation and the responsive coaching sections in the right-hand sidebar. And we've also got a handy coaching for impact section that I'll come back to when we debrief. But go ahead and take your 5 minutes. I'll set our timer in a moment. After that 5 minutes, I'll give you 3 minutes to post in the chat. And I'd like you to think about the following. You can respond to any one of these questions, and I'll post them in the chat too. So how might you, again, putting your leader cap on, how might you facilitate teachers in moving through this session? Where would you begin with them? And what might you prioritize? So which sections of session 7 might you prioritize with your teacher group? People are gonna have different answers to this. So I'll set 5 minutes on the clock here. We'll come back together at 7:21. And I'll post those questions in the chat. Okay, find a good stopping place. And I'd like you to respond to at least one of those questions in the chat. So based on what you were able to review during your 5 minutes, how might you facilitate this session? Where would you begin? And which sections would you prioritize with your teachers? Just the ones you're thinking of right now. Yeah, I'm seeing your reactions echo mine. So, you know, as people are saying, it really depends on where your group is. If you also picture instructional cycle 3 comes after instructional cycles 1 and 2. So if one's really privileging building those LDC competencies around designing the task, instructional cycle 2 is drilling into the competencies around the skills list. And by the time we're in 3 with teachers, we're really focusing them in on this standards-driven instructional sequencing. So the mini tasks, right? So ideally, if you've coached and led your teachers to these waters, you may be able to kind of more quickly get into the pitfalls like Seth was suggesting. The basics are always a great step 1 though, again, to do that quick check before getting folks into the pitfalls and then zooming out to think overall in alignment in sequencing. Yeah, I like that idea. So my question for the team here is what were your thoughts on some of these active facilitation strategies? Because there's a lot of different, like Seth said, layers and checks that you could ask people to do. Let's picture you've got your hour with them, maybe it's 45 minutes. How do you support the teachers and supporting each other to check their ladders? Critical friends is one great idea. Great idea. Because I could picture critical friends especially helping to look for overall alignment once they're a little more familiar with their friends module. How about if you check out this active facilitation strategy, number 3 here, it says have one person in the group focus on each pitfall as that particular pitfall specialist, then pass a PDF version of each person's instructional sequence around so each specialist checks it for her pitfall. until all 4 pitfalls have been checked. That's something that you can do virtually too. Just some of those quick, let's share the kind of support ideas. Great. Okay. Take one look down at the Coaching for Impact section, and then we'll move along here. So this is should be a reminder from last week about how the course sessions do have these Coaching for Impact guiding kind of posts for you as the coach. So if we were to head back into that analytics tab, again, you'd really be seeing that pattern emerging at this point. So you provide some feedback, you see the teachers take some kind of action in their module to apply your feedback. I want to note in particular the 3rd bullet here under Coaching for Impact. So that's a quick reminder to leave folks feedback in the comment bubbles in their modules. And it actually has 2 really great resources. One, again, is a reminder that we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. And it offers some responses that you might be able to copy and of course adapt for your own style and your teacher's needs. But it gives some common participant needs and some common responses that you might pop into those comments. Again, to give them quick, actionable feedback that they can use to make quick edits to their own work. Any other closing thoughts, or we'll move along to our workshop? Good? Okay.
All right. So a lot going on there. And I know it might feel like we are just like speeding through, and we really are. I just want to acknowledge that we're moving very quickly through just targeted sessions within instructional cycle 2 and 3, knowing that we're not giving you like the full experience of every session in those courses like we would hope a teacher would get the chance to do over the course of an entire year going through these instructional cycles, right? So we just want to, be metacognitive and draw attention to the fact that we are intentionally sampling little bits of the course content to try to expose you to resources that you will need and will use, even if you're not quite at the moment right now where you're ready to use them in that way. Because we know that, we're sitting here thinking right now about like, how would you coach and facilitate this session? And we haven't gone through it ourselves. So we're going to now put our learner hats back on and get to work on our own stuff for a little while and really continue to unpack this and develop our understanding of mini tasks and an instructional sequence by doing some workshopping in breakout groups. So before we actually go to our breakout groups, I just want to open up our resources for this again. So we will use the basic basics, which was already linked in the chat earlier. We will also use the skills and instruction workshopping protocol. Again, we're going to move kind of from the skills section that we looked at last week to the mini task section this week. And we will also be looking at one another's modules. So again, we'll be asking for some volunteers just to share their thinking. Even if you haven't had a chance yet to start working on mini tasks, this will be the opportunity to begin that thinking together. So I'm also going to ask Heather to post in the chat a link to our collection of modules and core tools where just all of our coach cohorts work in progress modules are living as we work on them together. So you've got 3 resources there: the basic basics, the skills and instruction workshopping protocol, and a link to our coach cohort module collection. If you'll take a moment to just get those open, get yourself set, I'm going to kind of assign everybody to their breakout rooms and send you on your way. We are going to stay in our breakout rooms until 8 o'clock. So a solid 30 minutes to work together in those rooms. And then as before, I'll kind of call us back together. You'll see a message. I'll say, hey, we're coming back in 5 minutes. And then you'll get called back when we're closing out the rooms. So take a moment to open those resources. And I know some people have joined since earlier, so I'm going to make sure everyone's assigned to a room. All right. Hi, everybody. So we are here now in our slightly smaller group in our breakout room to really take some time to dig in together and do some thinking around mini tasks and building that instructional sequence to support students in completing our task. So while we're here in this session, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and unmute, really open this up as a conversation. We're going to use the protocol, but we're going to use it really flexibly because, again, I know everyone's in different places in your work right now, and I want to address what you are thinking and wondering about when it comes to mini tasks. So let me actually just start there before we go into any of the resources. Does anyone here have like a burning question or thinking that you are like currently grappling with as you think about building an instructional sequence that we can address here together? So just so I can get a feel for things that you are thinking or wondering about when it comes to mini tasks and instructional sequences. Just need to dig in, huh? Yeah. And this part, it does get pretty complex because you are thinking about two layers at once, right? You're thinking about construction of each individual mini task, teaching a particular skill, one of those bites, and that progresses along, and you're thinking about the full sequence of mini tasks that leads up to completion of your final product. So there's definitely multiple layers here. So let me take a moment to share my screen and just look at the protocol together really briefly, so we can know what we're looking for as we work together in this part of the session. Last week, we looked at this part, PLC protocol skills list. We thought about what are the demands of the task and the focus standards, what smaller skills will students need to build and use to complete that task. Today, we're going to think about that instructional sequence. And there are two parts to that, just as we saw just now looking at session 7. Some of that is each mini task structured the way it needs to be to actively engage students in the learning, to make sure that they are the ones doing the work, producing something that gives you evidence for formative assessment, allows you to shape your instruction. That's what the basic basics check is so useful. Is the mini task structured in a way that makes sense? But then we're also looking for, across that full sequence of mini tasks, will they all together add up to adequate support for students in completing the overall writing product? So even though we're using the kind of specialized LDC lingo of skills and obviously not skills, but you know, mini tasks and product prompt and scoring guide, we have our particular way of talking about things. All we really are talking about when we say the instructional ladder is that sequence of daily instruction that supports kids in completing the task. That's all it comes down to. So we structure it in a particular way, but ultimately that's what we're thinking about. It's that next stage in the backwards design process of the instruction that leads up to the final product. So we're gonna take a look at some mini tasks. We're gonna do that basic basics check, and we're also gonna think about, you know, do we have the right mini tasks in our ladder to address the key skills, and you know, feel pretty confident that students are gonna have a certain degree of success on the final product. These are the steps, but again, we're gonna use this pretty flexibly to just kind of go where the wind takes us and see what we need to talk about as we look at specific examples. So I will need a volunteer to share your module with us and think through some of these steps. Again, even if you haven't had any chance to work on your mini tasks, that's okay, because we can use this as a starting point to look at some of the default mini tasks that are in there and think about how you might adapt or customize them to really serve your purposes in your module. So I'll give you a moment to think about it, but I'd love to have a volunteer to have us look at your instructional ladder for a few minutes tonight as a way to have these conversations.
You can use mine if you want to.
Oh, sorry, I can't see everybody. Who was that? Can you all hear me okay? I was getting an internet connection unstable message there for a moment. Give me a sign if you can hear.
Seems to be better now.
Okay. All right. So sorry, I couldn't see everybody at the moment. Who was that who chimed in and said we could look at yours? Teresa, was that you? Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So I have our collection open. And we are going to go to Teresa's module, recently updated as of today. And we're going to take a look at this together. So Teresa, would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit about your task as it currently stands? You know, what changes you made and what's kind of the key focus of your task?
Well, I had to make some changes because it wasn't quite working for me the way I was doing it. So I had to, sorry, my granddaughter's coming to join me.
Oh,
I had to change the actual task because I didn't feel like it really addressed what I needed it to address. Sorry about that.
that's okay.
Oh, she's my sweetheart. So I think with the task itself, I was able to tighten it up and make it more aligned to the actual standards that I had, and I feel more comfortable with that. But I haven't gotten a lot further than that because of different things I haven't been able to get accomplished. So I'm very much in the raw here, just waiting for everybody's input.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you for putting it out here for us to look at together. So I'm going to start by reading Teresa's task, so we just all have a sense of it. We'll take a quick look at the focus standards, and then we'll go down and we'll pick a skill to focus on, and we'll open up a mini task and do some work from there. So we have an informational explanatory task for 4th grade social studies. You probably remember the earlier version of this from our task workshopping in Blended Foundations, but it has evolved a little bit. So after researching informational texts on the Calusa and Tequesta tribes, excuse me, write an essay in which you analyze the differences between the tribal practices and customs. Support your response with evidence from the texts. What conclusions can you draw about the successes and failures of the Calusa and Tequesta tribes? All right, so several things going on here. We're looking at our reading standard 3 of explain events, procedures, or ideas, including what happened and why. And we also have our social studies standard of comparing Native American tribes in Florida, which we really see happening in the task. Even though it's not using the comparison template, we have this phrase about analyze the differences between the tribal practices and customs. So that comparison's really implied and embedded within the task. Okay, so with that in mind, let's think back a little bit to the conversations we had last week around skills. If we scroll down to the instructional ladder section and click view skills only, we can take a look at the sort of standard skills that are here and ask ourselves, like, is this everything that we need, or does this really specify exactly the skills that kids will need to complete this task? So thinking about the reading process in particular, we have essential vocabulary, reading for explicit understanding, analyzing the text, annotation, note-taking, and organized notes. Plenty of different things going on here. Do we see the particular skills that students will need to answer this task? And if it's helpful while we're doing this to look at the task on your own screen, I just put the direct link to this task in the chat.
I mean, if I'm going to pipe in, the essential vocabulary, they have to have the vocabulary to be able to do it. So that's just kind of, I think it's a given as far as I'm concerned. They do have to read for explicit understanding to be able to tell you the differences between the two. I mean, they have to understand the text. So isn't that kind of understood? That would be one automatically, or am I reading that wrong?
No, I mean, that or something like it, you would certainly expect to see in almost any module, especially where they're building content knowledge from text. So there's got to be that step where they are reading to understand the content. So absolutely, that makes sense here.
Okay, so then analyzing is part of the task. So if I'm going to have them analyzing in the task, they have to analyze the text for those specific elements, and that was the practices and the customs of those particular tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Annotating the type of text this is, it's not in a textbook, so it's very easy for us to make copies and the students to dirty up the text, as I've heard it called, dirty reading. and also the note taking. So I think it kind of all could go with it.
Yeah.
But that, again, that was just from my take on it.
Right. So I agree. I think you've got a lot of really essential building blocks in place in the skills list. There might be some ways that the skills could be customized a little bit, you know, to really shape them. You know, you do have comparison as an important element of the task. So you might be able to take one of these skills and really shape it just so that it explicitly says something about comparison.
Mm-hmm.
But as you were talking, I heard you talking about analyzing the text as a really important step. So let's look there. I am going to come out of, I didn't mean to be in edit mode. I'm going to go ahead and click view instruction so that the mini tasks pop back up under the skills. And what you have in all of the sort of default instructional ladders from which you built your modules are some kind of stock mini tasks that generally go with that skill. So for this skill of analyzing the text, the mini task that is attached is for split page note taking. So I'm going to open this mini task. First, it gives me a preview. If you haven't explored like this, there's a couple different layers of going into mini tasks. And then I'm going to actually select go to mini task, which is going to bring up the mini task in a full screen so that I can really see the details. So first, we're going to go through this stock mini task and do our quick basics check, right? So the first piece of the basics check is, are the skills skills? Can you see that they're defined as ability to? And are they enduring skills rather than something that's really, really too task specific? So in this case, what's our skill definition?
This one specifically?
I mean, yeah, just it's right there on the screen.
Yeah.
The skill definition for this.
Ability to analyze a text for specific elements stated in a teaching task.
Right. So first check, is our skill a skill? Is it stated as an ability to, and is it an enduring skill that students would carry on beyond this task?
Yes.
It is, okay? We've got our product, which is what?
Split page note taking.
Okay. So we know that to develop this skill of analyzing a text, they're going to create a product of split page notes, which really, if we're splitting hairs, if you think about the product itself, it's really the notes rather than note taking, which is kind of an activity, but we don't have to quite get to that level yet. And now we have the prompt. So we've got a pretty long prompt here, but this is where it really describes what students will do. Complete the split page note-taking handout or notebook guide by doing the following, and it gives you a couple of additional directions. So I want everybody to take a minute here to read through this prompt for the mini task, and then think about what we might be able to do with this prompt to customize it to really get at the specific kind of analysis that Teresa's asking her kids to do in this task. So first, take a look at what's here in the generic mini task, and then we're going to talk about how this could be customized a little bit to better support the specific demands of Teresa's task.
When we were talking about this today, one of the things I was talking about was studying the Calusa Indians by themselves, studying the Tequesta Indians by themselves, so I could see maybe customizing this so you have notes on one kind of Indian on one side and the other kind, and maybe even dividing each section into how they collected their food or particular customs that they did. And you could like do the Calusas on one side, and then as you come to things when you're reading or after you've read the Tequesta Indians, if it went with it or compared or contrasted, you could write it on the other side, so that then you're putting things that go together in some way, and you're already beginning that comparing and contrasting within that note taking.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we did talk about that today, right? When you have kids engaging with multiple texts to compare two different topics, especially in the lower grade levels, it is nice to start with each one individually and then
Right.
ask them to look across and think about connections, similarities, differences, and so on.
Right.
So what I hear you saying is you might take the graphic organizer here and change it up a little bit, right? So that it becomes something unique to what you're needing kids to do to capture the thinking of comparing the practices and customs of those two tribes. So this mini task has a handout attached. One thing that you could do is simply take that away and replace it with your own. Okay, so that's one easy way that you can customize a mini task, is by swapping out the resource that's attached to it to something you've created that's a little bit more custom, because we all do that all the time, right? I mean, I used to make graphic organizers left and right. I probably did reinvent the wheel a little bit too much to break my own rule. But you know, it's pretty quick to throw something together that will just help capture and organize the thinking kids are doing while they're reading, right? Then once you had done that, you could change up this prompt a little bit to be more specific, right? So Teresa, you were just narrating it a little bit. Go ahead.
My question is, how much would I be giving them too much information? Because again, I want them to do the reading and them to pull from the reading what they see that's different and the same, and them to do the comparing and stuff. That they've got to collect the information themselves. How much of that can you do in the note-taking guide where you give them guidance?
Let's open up that question to the group. What do y'all think?
I think that could be done in various ways, one of which is maybe modeling a few and then having them split out into groups and come up with some on their own and then maybe coming back together.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about a guided double bubble as a thinking map and kind of starting some of the differences on the outside, because I don't think we're looking at the similarities. We're doing a more of a comparison of the differences. So possibly doing a double bubble and just kind of note taking that same information, what you put in your bubbles, and plopping it down in your summary. And right there, you already have your summary and your information to actually build your final product.
Right. Well, we did talk today about taking the information from the note taking and putting it into a double bubble once we got it and could figure out what parts went where.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I agree with Norris. I think the modeling piece is key. Start maybe 1 or 2 bubbles and then let them finish the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And one thing I'm thinking, you know what, I don't really have time. I was thinking of just kind of sketching it out in a Google Doc real quick. But one thing this is making me think of is the power of using one tool throughout a learning process where students continually add to the same tool, as opposed to having like a new handout and a new thing to do for every single mini task. Because as you were talking, I was thinking like, okay, well, they're reading this text separately and kind of writing down key ideas about each tribe. That could happen under the reading for explicit understanding skill, where they're beginning to fill out just the separate sides, whether it's 2 columns or double bubble or whatever shape you choose. And they're simply recording key bits of information in those sections while they read for explicit understanding. Then maybe under analyzing the text, there's a mini task where they revisit using the same graphic organizer and add a section where they begin to, you know, jot down notes about what key differences do you notice, what key similarities do you notice, those kinds of things. So you can carry a product or a graphic organizer or a tool through multiple mini tasks to help kids add their thinking into one place as they move through these different skills.
I agree, because I think she could probably start with, there's like, I'm a thinking maps person. So I see her starting with a tree map, kind of classifying it first. And now that I've classified, I can turn it into a double bubble, or I can start with the circle map, which is brainstorming or defining in context, and actually have them to just brainstorm what things you notice from this tribe, and then you bring both maps together, which will help create your double bubble. So I'm just thinking of the multiple maps that she can use to help build that particular lesson.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks, Kim.
I'm sorry. I like that thinking, that train of thought, Kima. I'm wondering, so I see the note taking and this analyzing. Could those be like the same thing and maybe carrying that document on later on, or are there two purposes to the note taking, to the two different kinds?
I'll be honest with you. I think it was just I think this will go with it, this will go with it, this will go with it, and that's where it went. Okay. So now it's really looking at what I really need to put in it that's going to really support the task.
Okay. Thank you.
Nicole, I have a question.
Yeah.
And it may be a little off task. It's about Teresa's module, but not. It's just a general overall question.
Okay.
So when we're building these mini tasks, and I know that there's some prepared in here, is there any way to like do a search or something to where like whatever it is that you're trying to find, for example, based off of that standard, is there examples? Because I feel like I'm on wild goose chase if I just keep looking through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you asked that question, because a really important step is finding what's out there that's as close as possible to what you want. So you only have to make little changes to it, you know, adding in, you know, specific language around your topic or your text, but taking advantage of what's out there. So in addition to the mini tasks that are automatically populated into the module template that you used, you can add by searching the library. So when you're in your instructional ladder, and I promise not to make any permanent changes, Teresa, but I'm going to go into edit mode. For each skill, there will be a red button that says add mini task. So when you click that, you have three options. You can pull from any mini tasks you've already saved into your own library. You can look at the whole LDC library, or you can start completely from scratch. If you're the kind of person who just really likes to build from the ground up, you're more than welcome to do that. But I highly recommend perusing that library first, because there's a lot of good stuff out there. In some ways, there's too much stuff, like you said, Kima, where you end up going on a wild goose chase. There's so much stuff you don't even know what to look at. So there's a couple different ways that you can filter your search, just like if you're looking for a module. And what this is going to do is give you all these options on the left-hand side of filters that you can use to search for mini tasks. So first of all, if you want to only look for mini tasks that have been officially vetted, you know, you can uncheck unrated and only find, you know, ones that have been given a stamp of approval. But I actually don't recommend doing that, because people have added tons of great mini tasks to the library that just haven't gone through the system to be vetted, but they're still really useful. You can also select by grade level, although many tasks are useful across grade levels, discipline, and standard. Now, it's automatically going to filter for the particular skill that you were working on when you clicked add mini task, but you can undo that, because there's so many skills that are kind of similar to one another that you might want to expand your search a little bit beyond just things that are explicitly labeled for that skill. So you can unfilter for that and see everything that's here. So between these different filters, as well as the search bar, you're likely to be able to narrow down your search a little bit. So for instance, I might, if I know I want them to use a Venn diagram for some purpose, I might just search Venn diagram and see what kind of Venn diagram mini tasks people have created. Here's one about a triple Venn diagram. Here's one that's, you know, it's for geometry, but actually it's just about using compare contrast vocabulary. So I could probably pull that in and use it for any discipline. Compare and contrast to evaluate bias, lots of different options here that you might be able to use or customize. So it's kind of that combination of the filters on the left and the search bar at the top that will let you narrow down a little bit and hopefully find what you need.
Okay, thank you.
And if none of those work for you, you know, if you find one, you can just click add to module and it'll pop into that section. If you don't, you can always just use return to module. Nothing will have changed and you go back exactly to where you were.
So it's okay to make some adjustments to the already created ones, correct? How you told Teresa, that's right?
That's exactly right. Because once you pull it into your instructional ladder, that's a copy of the mini task from the public library that's yours to customize, edit, adjust. That the original one that was in the library is going to stay exactly the same. This is going to be your version of it in your module.
Okay.
Great.
Is it a good idea to customize it so that it exactly fits our task in terms of wording and everything? Or if it fits without changing the words, is that okay?
I think that you kind of go with the path of least resistance, right? If it fits without changing the words, why go to extreme measures?
Okay.
But it's also nice to be able to recognize the task demands in the mini tasks, especially if you think about this module going out to other educators to use. Making the connection really super explicit can only help. And you know, as we get later on down the road to the point where your modules are being, you know, peer reviewed and vetted, part of the criteria for the upper levels is that it's like easily replicable. You know, someone could really pick it up and teach it without having been a part of these conversations around the intent. And doing that customization of the language helps with that. But you don't have to go crazy. You know, it's just about making it so that the intention and purpose of each mini task is pretty clear in relation to your overarching task.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting a little close to time here. I'm going to send a message out to the other breakout group really briefly, just to give them a heads up that we're going to come back together pretty soon. Give me one sec here. Okay, I broadcasted a message to the other group. It literally says that, broadcast a message to all. Okay, so what other questions are coming up for you as we talk through this process of using and adapting mini tasks?
Yeah, I guess I'll share. So I just finished my module, and when I did the instructional ladder, I did take out a good amount of the mini tasks that were in there, and I created ones that were more reflective of what I actually do in the classroom. So I'm like looking at the ones that automatically pop up. I don't feel like I need to do annotation and split page note taking and this, you know what I mean? But what Kima brought up about the thinking maps, I also always like to do at least one thinking map because it gives them a chance to gather evidence before they're writing. So when I did my instructional ladder with module, I'm a little bit nervous because I did alter it so much that, I don't know, I'm worried about sending it off for peer review. So for example, the template, it has initial draft and then ability to do a second draft and then a final draft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that I actually broke down that first essay was, you know, ability to write a thesis statement, ability to write an introduction paragraph, and then body paragraphs, and then conclusion view. Because that's actually how I did it in the classroom. I did it step by step and then had them put them all together, peer review, and then submit a final draft. So I changed a lot of what they had in there. And is that going to be okay?
Absolutely. That level of customization is what we're ultimately driving towards. As you're working through your first module, we don't want you to go too crazy if you're not comfortable yet in customizing, because again, a lot of these mini tasks are useful and they can work for you. But where you want to get to eventually is the point where the mini task really does reflect exactly what's happening in your classroom.
Okay, perfect.
Basis as you move through the module. So we are actually going to keep pushing towards that level of customization as we just progress through this experience together. Would you mind if we took a peek, Tabitha?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So because it's really helpful to see different variations and different levels of customization and what works for different people. So I'm gonna find yours here in our collection and share. So first I'm going to come down and view skills only. So you really kept what was there. You've got essential vocabulary, reading for explicit understanding, and analyzing the text. 3 very useful and highly transferable skills that almost anybody can use in these modules. And then here you can see in your writing process, you've really broken it out. And you'll see a lot of modules in the library that do something very similar, where they really focus in on the different steps of the writing process and have explicit instruction for each piece. The number of steps and skills that you want to include there just depends on where your students are in their familiarity with the writing process, and also the unique demands of your particular task, because they might be super familiar with the writing process for just a basic explanatory essay. If you're asking them to do something like cause effect or compare contrast that requires a slightly different structure, you might really need to dig in a little bit more on how to put that together. So your level of detail and like chunking out of those steps will just depend on, what you know or anticipate about students with relation to your task. So
yeah, it was their first literary analysis essay, which is so different from things they've done in the past. And that's why I felt it was important to break it down.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So here's a great example in Tabitha's module of a mini task that's really customized to her task.
That's flow map, Tabitha.
So your product is a flow map. Your product is a product. Your prompt says, fill in the flow map by showing the order in which the author builds key ideas throughout the text. Use the smaller boxes to provide textual evidence to support the ideas you've identified. So your prompt is clear instructions to students to tell them how to do the product of the flow map. You've got a scoring guide that tells us what you're going to be looking for, that they've accurately identified a sequence of ideas in the text. And you've got some simple steps in your instructional strategies, right? It doesn't have to be a fully scripted lesson plan, but you've got that kind of guidance for the teacher who might use this, reminder of what text structure is all about. Chunk the text. You're going to do a little modeling. They're going to complete it while you circulate. So you've got all of the components here. You've got your product, prompt, scoring guide, instructional strategies, and this really reflects a key step in the learning process students need to succeed on your task, which, just to remind ourselves, I skipped this step earlier, is all about this analysis of how the author structures their article. So that's a lovely example, really, of a mini task that, you haven't changed everything in your instructional ladder, but you've got a key mini task that engages them in that thinking about structure and sequence that's so crucial to your overarching task. What do you all notice or wonder after looking at this example?
I think my question goes back to 2 sessions ago, where it's how much do we drill down versus what's the depth of the skill set list? Like, are we going super granular or kind of like big picture? I think that's kind of work in progress for me to figure out what do I think versus like the explicit instruction for other teachers within like a mini task, but then like the bigger picture of like which main tasks are necessary. So I'm still kind of battling that right now.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I think, sorry, I'm going to talk kind of quiet because I got the baby next door here. But I think that the mini tasks and what you choose in those really depends on where it's placed in the unit and or in the year, like what you were saying, Tabitha, about this being the first literary analysis. So if it's their first, then I think that those tasks and that skills list looks really different. I'm kind of in the same boat with our task or with our module, and actually where I'm teaching right now, thinking about what that skills list looks like and those tasks look like depending where it is in the year. And I think this reflects that really nicely to understand what is different when you're doing that. Their first is different than their fourth or their second.
All right. Because I guess,
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I guess it's the depth of what you go. I mean, and then, so I kind of have a question too. So when you get down to the other section, can you scroll down, Nicole, where it says standards?
Yes.
Do we choose new standards, or do we choose the ones that we already had, or the ones that actually fit that mini task? Because my question was, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. So if you're thinking about standards in your mini tasks, you've got to have some mini tasks that address your focus standards, right? That should be a key check in your instructional sequence. Do I have mini tasks for my focus standards? You're probably going to also have mini tasks for other standards that are not your focus, but are supporting standards. So you might have a vocabulary language standard. You might have a citing evidence standard. There are going to be things that wrap around the process that were not part of like the core driving the design of your task, but are important as part of the learning process. And as you build those into your instructional ladder, you can come back to the top of your module and add them to the list of standards as well. You just wouldn't mark focus, right? They would be part of the suite of standards you're addressing through the module, but they're not directly driving the design of your task.
I got you. So if I add additional ones, just don't make them the focus standard. Just, and my other question was, do I have to add them back to the original module, like when you first, how like these are listed, or just only put them in my mini tasks?
That's kind of a matter of personal preference. Some people just put them in the mini tasks. Other people like to list them here just so people get a snapshot of like what's going to be happening down through the instructional ladder. We don't really take a direct stance on that. Whatever you prefer is fine, as long as they're identified somewhere in there.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
And then the last point I want to make, Megan's probably in the other breakout room, like, what's going on? She said we were coming back in 5 minutes. But these are really great questions, is that you want to make your decisions about that level of depth on different skills based on your context. And the overview is a super helpful place to kind of message that to the world, where you go like, I designed this for ninth graders doing this for the first time. If your kids are more experienced, you might consider not doing as much of this. Or it could go the other way. Like, I'm writing this module and my kids have a lot of experience with a certain element, so I didn't do a lot of explicit instruction around that in my instructional ladder. If your kids haven't had that level of experience, you might need to add mini tasks as you consider teaching this module. So when you think about the modules going out into the world and being used by others, you can never hit quite the right mark for every single classroom. It has to be contextualized. And your overview is kind of your place to communicate to other educators why you made the decisions you did and what they might want to consider if they have a slightly different context.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's rejoin the big group. Great conversations and great questions. I hope that felt useful to you as you begin thinking about doing this in your own module. And of course, we're always available for questions. So I am going to close the breakout rooms and I'll see you back with the big group. They must have been having a good conversation too. Give them a moment to return. At some point, it just brings them back, whether they want to or not. So here they come.
We're back.
Sorry, guys. I know I said we're coming back in 5, and then we got to talking, and we kept going. And how's it going, other breakout group?
Good. We got we didn't get sidetracked. It was actually a really good land to be in, but we were brainstorming the overall sequencing of the thinking skills that students would need to, or thinking work rather, that students would need to engage in.
That's
to
awesome.
Move through, especially the reading and transition to writing sections. And then, chatted a little bit about how once you identify the thinking work, you can kind of back out of there to identify, all right, what are the enduring skills? And let me go find mini tasks for them or create my mini tasks.
Exactly. I think we had pretty similar conversation, right?
Yeah.
Just talking about that complexity of the fact that you're simultaneously thinking about a whole sequence and then the specific mini tasks that are going to support the steps of that. And sometimes that's not an exactly linear process. Sometimes you're zooming out to think about the whole sequence again, and then you're coming in to work on a specific mini task, and you zoom out and in. It changes scope a little bit as you move through that process, and hopefully it becomes fun work. I enjoy doing it. When we have the time and space, it's nice to do that thinking. All right, so hopefully the last 30 minutes or so have given you some things to chew on. Some things to kind of kickstart your own work as you continue this process of customizing the skills and mini tasks in your own module. So for the very last portion of the evening, we are going to step back yet again into kind of the coach role and think a little bit about how we can support others in this work. But we're not going to continue talking about mini tasks. We're actually going to take a moment to connect what we're doing here tonight to the work that we are doing in person this week in our sessions with teachers in the PLCs today and on Thursday. So we're going to talk a little bit about the analysis of student work and the different ways in which that can be useful and powerful, and how you might think about facilitating that particular kind of thinking with the teachers in your building. So for now, you don't need to go into Core Tools on your own screen. I'm going to share my screen as we take a quick look at session 9 in instructional cycle 3. And we've looked several times at the spiral map that kind of shows the 3 instructional cycles of the design assignments course and how the focus changes in each one, right? I see 1, the focus was on the task. I see 2, focuses on skills. I see 3, focuses on instructional sequence and mini tasks. And yet they all hold one thing in common, which is that the closure of every instructional cycle is the analysis of student work in order to reflect on the module and move on to the next one. So those of you who were in the room today did some really deep thinking around this, and we actually looked at some student work. It was samples of student work because most of the elementary teachers hadn't had a chance to collect their own yet, but we went through this process. The rest of you are going to go through this process on Thursday of really using a protocol to analyze student work. But it's really important that this is the kind of connecting key piece of every instructional cycle, because like we talked about today, at some point the proof is in the pudding, and what you can learn from student work is immensely powerful in a variety of ways. So I am going to scroll a little bit to think about the goals of analyzing student work, or the different ways to analyze student work. So take a moment to consider these 5 different goals or ways of analyzing student work that you see on my screen right now. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about like which ones resonate the most for you, given your experience, and why. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So take a moment just to look at these 5 ways to analyze student work and think about which ones really resonate for you.
I think that one of the most important things to me that's striking is number 5. Where do I go next from what my students are showing me? And as we've been talking about enduring skills, I think that, utilizing their student work to decide what enduring skills do I need to continue to teach, and what enduring skills can I say, okay, they're doing well on that, I can move on to something else.
I mean, hopefully other people are thinking the same things, but I think about just so powerful what we saw today, that transition from what individual students are doing to that idea of many. So collecting that trend through, maybe it's 3 students. Sometimes there's that outlier, that one student who's doing many things really, really well, or many things not so well, but what's that trend? What am I seeing across multiple kids?
Absolutely.
Well, I think today when we were looking at that student work, we saw where the task may not have really fit what the skills were and what was expected. And we could see that when we graded every one of those, or looked at each one of that student work, and they were looking at point of view, and that really wasn't the focus of what the teacher was really looking for. So numbers 3 and 4 really kind of stick out to me.
Absolutely. So as you are scrolling down to this other section, which kind of just gets into a little more depth about why analyzing student work is important and how it can be useful, I would just invite you to consider this section and consider, as you're working with teachers, how you can frame the ask to upload student work in such a way that they see the value of it and it doesn't become just a compliance step. Because one thing that we find with experience, and you may find too, is sometimes teachers are reluctant to share their student work, right? And that's easy to understand. It's very easy to understand why a teacher might be reluctant to upload that, to share it with others. So what are some of the things that you could do or say to your teachers to help frame the value of sharing student work, so they're not just doing it because somebody said you have to attach 3 samples to get your certificate of completion?
I think it helps others look at well, first of all, it helps a teacher figure out if the task and what she taught is transferring to that student product. So, giving them the opportunity to revise that and revisit it. But also it gives other teachers an example of what their writing can look like. So it kind of helps drive their instruction as well.
Absolutely. So really framing it as a valuable learning tool for others, kind of a contribution to the community of educators to give them things to think about and models to use and guide their own work. What else? One thing we saw today in thinking about getting people into a comfort zone with this kind of thinking and reflection is that sometimes starting with not your own samples of student work can actually be super powerful, right? So if you are thinking about working with teachers to develop the skills and the habits of mind to do this kind of thinking where they are really looking at student work for the purpose of learning. What can I learn about my task, about my instruction, about my kids, about where to go next? Walking through that process in a safer environment with someone else's, anonymous student work can be a really powerful way to get that flow happening. And then people begin to see the value of it as they see how much they can learn and maybe feel a little bit more comfortable sharing their own. So that's one thing that you just might want to keep in mind, as you get into this process, because what we're hoping is that maybe on the days, when we show up to work with the teachers is not quite the right moment for them to have their student work and be ready to unpack it and use that learning to, move on to their next module. But when they are ready, you'll be there, right? And you've had some experience, you've got some protocols, and you've done some thinking about how to frame that in a way so that they feel it's useful to them and a powerful learning experience instead of what can be kind of a scary and vulnerable moment if it's not handled carefully. So that's a reason that we wanted to just put on that facilitator hat a little bit tonight with relation to the work that we are doing in person this week, so that you can think about how that might play out in your own scenarios. All right, we are just about getting to that point of wrapping it up. So I'm actually going to turn it over to the lovely Heather to lead us through some reflection. Heather is always there in the background making things work for us and getting us the links we need in the chat. And so I'm going to invite her now to help us wrap things up with a little bit of reflection. So take it away, Heather.
Thank you, Nicole, for the lovely introduction. It's really funny that Megan brought up my old principal, because I will bring up a story later at the end of this. But I wanted us to step back and kind of just metacognitively think about what it's like to digest the information we've had just from tonight from IC session 7 and 9, as well as maybe some of the asynchronous work you had done prior to this meeting. So as a learner, since we always kind of process this through a leader or a learner hat, we're going to focus on just a learner first. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions to just think about and respond to your design partner through the chat. And those 2 questions are, what new ideas or content am I learning? How can I integrate this into my daily practice? So just a few minutes, we'll say 2 minutes. I want you to think about those 2 questions. I'll pop them in the chat. And then if your design partner is here, I want you to send them a message. Thanks, Nicole. And talk about those 2 questions. And then we'll come back and discuss together. If your design partner is not here, please feel free to message me or Nicole or Megan.
Yes, the Michael Carno.
Yes. We call him MC. Don't tell him, but his MC. All right. So if anyone is brave and willing, please feel free to either pop an idea that you or your partner had in the chat, or go ahead and click unmute and chime in. So those 2 questions we were looking at are, what new ideas or content am I learning, and how can I integrate this into my daily practice?
Nobody learned anything. I guess we failed.
Well, Lisa learned something. Lisa and I were talking, but I didn't want to give it away. So Lisa was talking about the 5 questions that Nicole was just showing us. And she said she would love to have those on an index card and keep them next to her desk, just to kind of constantly go back and check, where the students were at with her lesson. So I think that was a really good idea as a learner. So that's great. Anything else? Come on, I know we're at the end of the night.
I was just, I'm sorry.
Go for it, Beth.
I know. I've always got something, I was just talking to Jen, though, about the way that Megan took us through the skills list. I'm not sure that I would have approached it in that way. So it was really eye-opening for me to see her take us down that path, and not at all how I would have taken my teachers. And I like to see that. It was very eye-opening for me. I was confused at first, no doubt. And then I saw where she was going, and it made sense. So it was nice to see.
I thought one thing going off of that, sorry, Seth, I was just trying to give the backstory for what Beth had said. We were using the comment bubbles to kind of track what the skills could be before we actually went through and thought about what the mini tasks were. And I thought that was an interesting idea, so we don't have to wrestle through our papers to try and find them, because I am that person. I have the journals and I have to go back and find it. So it's nice to have it all saved there and utilizing those comment boxes.
Smart trick.
I just thought just the simple, in our roles, we're always looking for, man, they're a tool out there. I mean, just literally like this, and it was nice to see the basics. I think I saw that like a couple of maybe years ago or a couple of iterations ago, but seeing that now is like, oh yeah, so we're not unusual that we're wondering, okay, so what's the skill again, and how do I word that, and then what's the product, and that kind of thing. So that's a great little piece, I think, the basics.
So you're really transitioning us nicely into my next two questions, which I just kind of want to keep the floor open. But as we are moving along through deep dive, our focus should be more on our leadership and how we're going to use this information as we're facilitating or coaching a group. So thinking about that and going off of the information you've received tonight or anything you've learned in this course, think about how you can apply these resources to your work as a coach or facilitator, and then what exactly you can do, maybe what commitment you can make to yourself of, okay, I'm going to definitely try and implement the basics first when I'm analyzing a skills list and mini tasks for my group of teachers, or try and think about what you can do in your practice as a result of the work you're doing here.
All right. So you are thinking now about how you can apply this to your own work, how you can apply it to your work with others. We're going to wrap it up for the night. I want to thank you again for a long and really great day and tell you how much I'm looking forward to working with those of you that I didn't see today on Thursday. Excited to be here in Florida. My hotel bed awaits here. So as we conclude, as always, next steps, you are going to just continue working on your skills and mini tasks. That's really your mission right now. Keep working on your module, skills and mini tasks, using the learning that we've done together over the last few sessions. Yes, we are getting to that point, Beth. So keep that in mind as you go forward. Of course, we'll send the usual follow-up email with the learning plan steps, the recording, the chat log. Next week, if you can believe it, is the final session of Deep Dive 1. Whew. So you have made it a long way in a short amount of time.
In only 1 hour.
Yes, next week we'll be back to our usual hour. Unfortunately, I will not be here, but I leave you in the good hands of Megan, and it'll be the return of Barb. So she'll be back joining you as well for that final session. I'm escaping to Spain, so I will be thinking of you all in whatever time zone I'm in at that point. I don't know. I might be asleep at that time. I guess it's many hours ahead. But unfortunately, I will not be here for that last session. But I know you are in great hands. And it'll be a nice chance to kind of wrap up and reflect on all the learning that you've done so far. And at that point, we'll really get into the specific next steps in terms of like finishing your module and submitting it for peer review with the revisions to the task and the instructional letter. So don't worry about any of that right now. We'll have all those details for you very clearly next week in your final session, and we'll share them with you through email as well. So thanks again for a great night. Same old final word whip, ticket out the door, one word or phrase of something that you're thinking about as we leave here tonight, and then you can go off on your merry way.